August 6, 2019 committee to order. We have three updates at this meeting, and the first one will be Reimagine RTD, which should be very interesting. So, gentlemen, would you start your discussion?
Good evening, Chair Lubau and Board. This is Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning, and I am going to turn this immediately over to my compatriots here, the project management team for Reimagine RTD, Bill Soroy and Brian Welch.
Good evening, Chair Lubau and members of the board. We're here tonight to give you a brief update. Most of this will be handled by Bill Soroy, but I'm just going to introduce a couple quick things to bring you up to date. As we've described before, we have a consultant team in place right now. Here are the key consultants that are on the project. Oops. Okay, there we go. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce in the audience this evening the project manager for Felsberg, Holt, and Ulevig, Holly Buck, along with her deputy, Julie Skeen. We're really excited to have them on board leading the consultant effort on this project. Oh, okay. The other thing that I'll highlight is just a really brief overview of the schedule. We now have a notice to proceed. They're officially underway as of August the 2nd, so we're in month one of the Reimagine RTD project and plan. The first big milestone that will be, now I'm obviously shrinking a lot of things here very quickly, but the first big milestone on the project, this 2-year effort, will be before the board about a year from now, well, the fall of 2020, with the results of something called the System Optimization Plan. This is something you heard about last week from our guest Jarrett Walker, where we begin with a current assessment of RTD services on both the bus and rail side, and then bring back to the board as the result of a big, open, and transparent engagement process, a system optimization plan. And with that introduction to engagement, I'd like to turn it over to Bill Soroy.
Okay, there we go. It's delayed a little bit. So thanks again. This is Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities. I was just going to highlight a few things on the engagement side. Pauletta outlined some of this earlier, but I wanted to give it a little bit more detail on some things, especially the upcoming board study session at the end of the month. But we'll have some things like the advisory committee we'll be working on. We will start kind of, this could be our official, start of our official board updates, but when we come to you in October, we may actually have some real things and data and stuff to start talking about. So that'll be really interesting. And we'll be really engaging the stakeholders later this fall. Another thing to note here is the Mobility Summit, which again, we are planning to do and tie that into Reimagine that will be later this fall. One of the big pieces early on that we're going to be doing is establishing the advisory committee, which I had it up in a second ago. There we go. It's very touchy here. This is a list of potential members that we've defined kind of through some input from the board and through some discussion in terms of all the people that we hope to have on it represented. Obviously, there's a long list of people there. We want a very diverse group and a group that really does. All right. Let's see here. Oh, now I can. There we go. Just gotta wait for the actual thing to happen. We want a very diverse group, one with broad geographic representation, one that has kind of public, private, and nonprofit perspectives included, and one that really does we feel have the ability to kind of focus on regional issues and regional solutions. So we hope that in the end that's where we come to with the advisory committee, which, like I said, we're starting that process this month, and hopefully by the end of next month we'll have that formed. Okay. There we go. Wanted to highlight the study session on the 27th. That is going to be, I think, important to the start of our process. One of the primary goal of that meeting will be to kind of start the discussion with the board about a series of guiding principles that will kind of be the foundation for our Reimagine RTD process. Now, maybe wondering kind of what do you think about it in a guiding principle? And we've looked at a lot of these. I mean, this term is used throughout kind of, I would say, the planning world, and especially in a lot of other major planning, comprehensive planning efforts have been done around the country. But really trying to define the values that we should consider as we move and make decisions into the future. And you might think of it as something that's not like a tactical action, and a good example of this is if you think about technology and innovation as being kind of a principle or a category that you want to look at. The way you might define that guiding principle is, RTD strives to be innovative and use new technology effectively as a principle. But it wouldn't be something like RTD should develop an electrified bus fleet in the future. Because that's more of, again, an outcome-based, it's more of a value-based. So again, I wanted to make sure that nuance was understood by the board. So in preparation for the meeting, one of the things that we'll be doing shortly, hopefully within the next few days to a week, is we'll be sending out a survey to the board about some of those ideas with try to get some sense of priority from the board in terms of, so it can inform our discussion that we have on the 27th. So the goal is again, to get some input from you all so that we can have a very robust discussion when we get together on the 27th. And with that, I think that is the final update. There we go. I got to the question slide that time. So I think with that, we'll open it up for any questions that you may have.
Just me. Okay. Well, I'll start then. Who chooses the advisory committee, and how many people are going to be on it? Because it sure seems to me like this is a very important organization. I mean, we're going to be redoing RTD, and these are people that are going to be part of that decision-making process.
Sure. So in terms of how big, we're thinking 25 to 30 people, essentially is the kind of the size of the committee. So pretty big, large committee. In terms of what we've talked about thus far, one idea that we have is that we would go through a process, one, to work with the sub-regional TIP forums to decide or ask for them to select representatives on the elected official side. So to remind everybody, DRCOG has established a regional process for the sub-regional, they call it sub-regional TIP forum, which is where all the counties get together and talk about transportation and transportation funding. We thought that was a good mechanism for us to request that they provide a representative or representatives that would serve on the committee. So that would be one vehicle that we would use to help select. The other ones, we thought we'd go through those categories, and obviously we're looking for senior people, people that are the heads of the agencies or the heads of the organizations that we would do. We'd work with the chambers to get representatives from that. So the idea is that we would do that, then we were going to work with the general manager and the chair to kind of give some kind of a feedback and buy off on kind of that full committee list, and then that would be how it would ultimately be decided. That's the concept as we have it right now.
Thank you. Did you also include transit advocates?
Yes, yes.
Like 9 to 5 or whatever,
yeah.
Whatever's out there. Yes,
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, well, a lot more people. Okay, Director Lewis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Bill, just pull out your pen and I'll tell you all the groups that you should add. So this may have been a bit premature when I talked to Pauletta, so I just said the youth, and that was one that was missing. And specifically, I see that the University of Higher Education, and those may be students or they may not be until it's more clarity around that, are senior citizens, if that's appropriate. One of the things we heard from the past program working group participants and those that did not participate in that committee was that we were missing the unhoused population or those that serve those populations. So that's one thing to consider. And in that same vein, are there, how will we leverage the groups that are already in existence, like the past program working group, like the CAC, to pull from or to learn from those groups? It's simply a suggestion. I see here for the RTD union leadership, are there opportunities to pull directly from operators, mechanics, those not in the leadership position, and then your average everyday rider? So I'm just thinking about the human experience. How do we make sure that that's a part of this conversation and dialogue? That's it. Thank you.
Just one comment. I think we have a multi-layered approach in terms of how we're approaching the outreach. I think a lot of those, organizations or groups you're talking about, even if they're not on the advisory committee, we're going to be reaching them through other forms, because we'll have multiple levels that we can reach them at, either through, employee forums, or if we're doing speaker bureau and going out to meeting with specific, groups, we'll be doing that as well. So even if we don't get everybody on the advisory committee that everybody wants, I think that we will have the opportunity to go out and meet with groups separately during the process.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that.
Thank you. Director Catlin, please.
Thank you, Chair Lubell. Two, or maybe point of clarification and then question. It's my understanding that we, as a board, are going to be developing guiding principles first, and then the advisory committee will be selected subsequent to that?
Kind of in parallel, that's kind of the way that we're thinking about it.
Okay, and then I personally have had a number of people who have expressed interest in participating at some level, and I was just curious if you all have had folks come to you and express interest in participating as well.
Yes, we have had a few folks come to us, and I think if you have names of people, you can go ahead and submit them to us so that we have those, because, even, like I said, even if they don't end up on one of the committees, we probably want to start developing a mailing list or an email list that we will do for any kind of event or public meeting or other kind of, engagement activity that we could send out to people.
Thank you. If I might, I personally would, as we get through this August 27th meeting and start really examining the guiding principles, I think for me, I wouldn't want to pass along names unless I thought they really fit into that process. So that's just my personal preference. Thank you.
Chair Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One thing I would like to point out is that I've spoken with the General Manager about this at some length, and the concern I know arises in a lot of board members and the public in general when talking about an advisory committee and asking whether this is going to be like the past program working group, where we appoint a number of people and they come up with a specific plan and present it to the board. No, that is not what this is like. The advisory committee will consist, and there will be many of the same constituencies, not the same individuals, but the same constituencies that will form this advisory committee. But the board will be operating hand in hand throughout, being aware of what's going on, what is being said, what is being shared. The board will be entitled, just as any member of the public is, to attend those meetings. And because you'll simply be attending as a member of the public, we don't have to go through the whole noticing process and everything else. I'm appointing 2 people to the advisory committee only, so that we don't have to go through all that notice process, and more importantly, because certainly the meetings will be noticed, they will be well noticed to all, but they won't have to be recorded as we do here with the audio and video recording in that same process. We will have some minutes will be made, there will be some recordings, but we won't have the same complex system that has to be transcribed and included in part of our minutes and so forth. But everyone will be able to attend, everyone will be able to see what's going on, everyone will be engaged, and the advisory committee is not going to come back with a proposal and say, here's our solution, now all you have to do is adopt it. That's something I want to disabuse right now, because it's not that process. It's an advisory committee. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Director Walker, please.
Thanks. So it seems like a lot of agencies, maybe not a lot, but at least a few agencies are going through similar exercises. And I imagine that you're looking to them to see how they keep things on track and where they start, where they are, where they ended up. Can you give an example of a couple that you've looked at already? I'm thinking of Houston as a low-hanging fruit, and so is Salt Lake City.
Well, what I did is I listed a number of agencies that are have either completed these bus system restructurings. They use a lot of different terms that our team has actually worked on, members of our team, and this includes DART, their Comprehensive Operations Analysis, MARTA, Comprehensive Operations Analysis, LA Metro, their bus system restructuring, Lynx in Orlando, Florida, CODA, which is in Columbus, Ohio, Jacksonville, Florida, and Nashville. These have all been worked on by a combination of Kinetics Transportation Group, which is part of our team, as well as Cambridge Systematics. Now, that isn't the entire list, but I wanted to list a number of agencies that we would look at, some of them as peer agencies, others as maybe a little smaller, but that have direct experience in doing this very recently.
Okay, yeah, that's some of those are others that I've heard. Columbus is an example of one that's experienced some growth, some ridership increase after its reformation. I'd like to suggest, I'm sure you guys have thought of it already, but I'll say it anyway, but to include some strange bedfellows in with the group. It's kind of Machiavellian. You know, bring your enemies close. Not that we're all on the same team. We all want to move people, but some maybe transit adverse groups or pro road groups to also have that voice, and I'm sure they'll be touched during the outreach. And I also want to say that I have no affiliation with Walker Parking other than. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Williams, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just, you guys probably all know this, but I just want to put it in the record. So PPWG, which is the past program working group, had a page on the RTD website where the minutes of their meetings were published for the public to follow along. And it did get a lot of following along, I believe. So that might be something you might want to think about with this. The other thing is there are a number of citizens groups around the greater Denver area. I'm thinking of the City and County of Denver's disability groups. They have a application. It's one page, and it's posted in that same kind of location, and you can pull it down, fill in what we would want to know, and send it in, so that people who want to apply, that Director Catlin or Director Lewis didn't recommend for the group, including maybe some of those strange bedfellows, could just go there and get that one pager and send it in, and then we might get some people that were not necessarily chosen. So those are just a couple of thoughts. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. I am sure that all of us will appreciate it in the long run.
Thank you. Director Cook, please.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't strictly speaking an ad hoc committee. This is a committee, in other words, it's not a committee that is just comprised of people from the board. So I wanted to suggest that the board as a whole have the ability to weigh in and maybe even make the selection of the people who will represent it on that advisory committee, as opposed to it just being sort of a unilateral chair. Nothing against your judgment on that, but just to allow for a little bit more participation. I don't know how other folks think about that.
Thank you. I'd like to weigh in on that and ask our counsel, is there anything prohibiting that? Sorry to throw that at you.
Yes, this is Rolf Aspav, General Counsel. If this is an advisory committee for staff, then you don't have to have the notice, the minutes, the executive sessions, all the things that would apply under the Colorado Open Meetings Law. If it is an advisory committee reporting directly to the board, then you run into those issues where you have to have things done in the same way as the board would itself. So that's why having it as an advisory committee to staff is much less cumbersome. As far as the specifics on how people are chosen and what sort of input is received or whatnot, that's really something that can be discussed and looked at. But just wanted to make that point.
All right. So I personally think that's an interesting idea, and I'm wondering if we can have some kind of report back on whether that would be possible.
We will look into that, you bet.
Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, I'm just wondering if Director Folska is on the line. Director Folska, are you on the line? Okay. Director Rivera-Malpietti, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things, and being part of the past program working group, the one thing that was really apparent to me was the lack of diversity geographically. And I just want to make sure that we have partners from the entire region involved, and ethnicity and different languages is really also very important. So those are the two pieces. I think this is a great list, but that geographic component was really huge, and just people of color. Thank you.
Director Lubow, I am here.
Oh, okay,
I
good.
just couldn't get my unmute button quick enough, but when it's appropriate, I do have a question.
Yeah, why don't you speak now?
Okay, thank you. Bill, I was wondering if on your list you have constituents from our communities with people with disabilities.
Yes, we do.
And who are they from?
We just kind of titled it the disability community. We haven't exactly said who that is, and we love input from the board in terms of how they, your input on how that may be selected.
Well, I would just suggest that there are many kinds of groups, different groups, whether they're, focused on cognitive disabilities or whatnot. In fact, the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities in Boulder would be really a great place to tap into as well.
Great. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Busick, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this 1,000-member advisory committee that we're putting together, I would just, we need to have everyone represented, but no one entity overrepresented, right? So it should represent the ridership of the district and make sure we keep. I think it's a pretty simple concept, and I know you guys will. However we do it, it'll turn out okay. Thanks.
And Chair, if I may, please. It will require a real commitment from those who volunteer / are selected to serve on the committee. We are looking for them to make it to the meetings on a monthly basis for 2 years, to actively participate, to be prepared going in. It will be something where the expectations are not dissimilar from those placed on the selected body, and so we'll be looking for that commitment. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Are we done with this particular update, gentlemen? More. Director Lewis, please.
Thank you, Bill and Brian. I have one more, faith-based. We don't have that represented on potential candidate members. And I'm curious if you all had already outlined the selection process for choosing who would be on the committee.
The piece that we have outlined is going through the DRCOG sub-regional forums for getting elected officials selected. That is essentially that. And then I think we've certainly there's going to be a process on the RTD side to select those. But beyond that, we have not done that other than saying that we want, decision makers and leaders in those organizations to be those representatives on the advisory committee.
Can you keep us updated as you flesh that out more?
Yes, we will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And are we done with this update? Thank you very much. It's been very interesting. We have another one coming up.
Yes, we do. So this is Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning. Bill Soroy's remaining. Susan Altus and Chessie Brady will be joining us up here for the real estate and joint development update. And I'll turn it over to that team.
So this is Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit Communities. I'll attempt to run the slideshow, but I'm not. I'm not.
Click.
Hopefully, no. I'm told I'm not supposed to do that. Okay.
Just a brief update on this. Susan Altus, Senior Manager of Real Property. Just a brief update on the Montbello Park and Ride disposition. Located at 4690 Peoria Street. This is former Park and Ride that became not used when the A line opened and not served by RTD with the opening of the A line. The estimated fair market value of this property was determined to be $576,000 after review by RTD's review appraiser of the appraisal prepared for one of the stakeholders. On April 1st, 2019, sorry, Bill, we issued an invitation for sealed bids. This was a blast email sent to over 65 entities, real estate companies, real estate brokers, investors, individuals, anyone who had ever contacted RTD saying, in the event this is ever sold, please let me know. That called for sealed bids to be submitted on May 15th. We got one sealed bid in the amount of $600,000. The Montbello Organizing Committee was notified in May of the acceptance of their bid, and the closing is pending.
The next update that we wanted to do is on the 29th and Welton property. A little bit of background on this site. This site was originally purchased for the Central Corridor line, which opened in 1994. It is a half-acre lot. It was also identified as a TOD pilot project in 2010 with the intent of promoting and trying out new ideas for TOD on this site. Some recent activity in terms of with the board. Let's get to this. There we go. Boy. That's not working for me tonight. We did go to the board in December of 2016 to get an authorization to pursue an option agreement with the city and county of Denver. That was approved by the board. There were 3 stipulations of that agreement. One, that it had to be for sale housing. Second, that the 25% of the minimum of 25% of the units had to be affordable, and that the financial capacity of the developer would be taken into account in terms of the final authorization of the option. Since that time, we've worked with the city, and who has been leading the process. It really has been their process. They have been the one that we participated as we were a participant in the developer selection, but it was really their process. We've worked with them. They have been working with the selected developer, but they are indicating that they believe that they're not going to be able to kind of fulfill their commitment, and will be canceling the RFQ probably later this month. So that's one of those things in terms of, this looks like it's not going to be come to fruition. So one of the things we are talking about is next steps, which is what do we do in terms of talking with the city about options for that site. Certainly anything that we talk about, we will be coming back to the board with in terms of any kind of goals that we talk about with the city in terms of any future, procurement or anything else that we decide that we want to potentially pursue. So this is kind of a, wait and see, and hopefully in the near future we'll be coming back to you with some of our kind of the fruits of our conversation with the city.
Hi, Chessie Brady, TOD Manager. This is an unusual one. The National Medal of Honor Museum is a museum that doesn't exist at the moment, but is seeking a location somewhere in the country, and they've narrowed down their sites to Denver and Arlington, Texas. And the Denver site is shown in your packet. It's actually on state property at the corner of Lincoln and Colfax. And so they're working through the state's process with that. That will require legislative action. But they're also interested in the gravel parcel adjacent to our Civic Center station, which would be, you can go to the next slide, please, if you're able, a grand entrance to their museum, a landscaped area to draw people into the museum. And the terms that they've requested from RTD would be a 55-year sublease, which would be through 2075, for a nominal fee with options to renew. Let me start again. Let me just so we're all focused. All right, so RTD does not own this property. We have a long-term ground lease through 2075. The museum would like to sublease the gravel parcel adjacent to the station for the remainder of the ground lease, again, for a nominal fee. They would take over the security and maintenance. They would landscape it and probably put in some programming, something related to the National Medal of Honor winners, recipients. And they are requesting full control of the design and construction of their facility. So as we've been going back and forth with them, and we're really interested in what the board thinks about how we should negotiate with this group. Some of the considerations we've been thinking about are that right now it is a gravel lot. There's an opportunity for it to be nicer, be activated, have somebody else invested in it, perhaps outsource, or we would expect to outsource maintenance and security. And there's obviously a city and state interest in locating a national museum at Civic Center. And the city and the state have been working with the museum to that end. That said, opening up this space to the museum precludes development by or with RTD on that site through the remainder of the ground lease. And our current lease cost for that portion of the parcel is about $123,000. So when we think about actual costs that we're incurring for that land, we're putting it around that $123,000 mark. And just for your information, we've looked at this in the past, is what could be built on that site, and it's a building of approximately 250,000 square feet. But for this to happen, it's important to note that a lot of different stakeholders would have to agree. There'd have to be changes in the leasing arrangements, sales, all the parties involved. So this is not a question of either we offer it to the museum or we get this building. This is just potential building that could maybe be built in the future if everything came together at the right time. So if we decide to move forward with the museum, the next steps for doing so would be we would come back to the board in September with our proposed terms for you to approve. The museum would then certainly choose Denver, of course, over Arlington, Texas. And then in March 2020, we would sign subleases with them. So interested in your feedback on that. And then the last slide.
There we go.
One more. Can I get one more? There we go. Okay. Is a reminder of our procedure for unsolicited proposals for joint development. So this was approved by the board a few years ago. And we are anticipating an unsolicited proposal from a developer at the 38th and Blake Station Park and Ride in the near future. We've been in discussions with them, working through steps 1 and 2. We expect the proposal to come in, at which point the board will be notified, and then we'll move through the remainder of the procedure. And happy to get into more detail about that if you have questions.
Thank you for bearing with us during that slideshow.
It's always interesting. Okay, Director Menton, please.
Thank you. I'd like to speak first about the Welton, or ask a question about the Welton project. That's one that I've been interested in quite a while, especially because it's not that the land was donated to us, we had acquired it. And I know, Susan, you and I have had some conversations, but that was some years ago. Very limited, not as much as some other properties. Bill, you and I have had some more conversations. What I would like to know is, with the status of this right now, if there is an option, and we as a board look at this, that From my background on this, I went and walked that area for a couple hours one day, trying to find the original owners, trying to find out how to get those hold of the owners who owned it before we acquired it through some sort of legal process.
It was a negotiated acquisition.
It was a negotiated acquisition. So were they had a for sale sign on it and we said, yeah, sure, we'll buy it? Or
There was a notice of intent to acquire the property. We prepared an appraisal.
Can we get our mic, please?
Sorry. The properties were acquired through the process of notification that their property was needed for a public project. We appraised the property. They had an opportunity to appraise the property also at our cost, and they accepted the offer.
And what did we pay for that property?
I don't have that dollar amount with me tonight.
All right. Could you let me know that? We may have had this discussion in the
I
past.
think I sent it to you in the past,
Yeah.
but I'll do it again.
Okay. And if I remember right, I think and don't quote me on the exact number, but I believe it was around $70,000. It wasn't a significant amount.
Okay. I know I remember going to City and County of Denver doing a physical request, and this is going back 3-4 years ago now, so it's a little bit foggy. But I would like to find out, when we acquire a property through the notice of intent to acquire, and then we figure out we don't need the property any longer for the replacement parking on Welton, if that we create a policy that puts the previous owner as the top priority and gives the original owner that we took through a government process, in my opinion, give them first rights to buy that property for an amount similar to, we'll have to figure out the dollar amounts. But to me, that's respect to the property owners of the district where we acquire property for a public purpose and then find out we don't really need it anymore. To me, that would be great. The city of Edgewater has a process, I think, similar in respecting property owners, that they get first rights if property like this becomes available again. So for one, Susan, if you could confirm the dollar amount for me, then I would like to know, based through whatever means you have, getting the name of the owner and what options there would be to hunt up contact information for them.
I think I have sent you some information, actually copies of the deeds before. Those would have the owner's names on them. I'll send them again.
Okay.
I do believe in this case, this property was acquired in 1993 or 1994, and I believe the original property owners are deceased. And so,
Okay. So if you could get me the copies of those, then I'll try to figure it out, figure out a genealogy line or something and see what I can come up with. Then moving on to this National Medal of Honor. I don't know what they mean by nominal fee. If we've got $125,000 out per year, what does that mean?
I think it means $1 a year.
Then the answer from this seat right here, no. National Medal of Honor is not our elected job. Our job is transportation. So 1 of 15 people saying no go on that deal. I can see that while the shade the building's going to provide in the summer is going to be real sweet, it's also going to be a lot of ice and concrete deterioration and safety issues with the height that I'm seeing in this created shadow.
Are you looking at the mass and bulk image?
She is.
So that's an image that's something that we've at RTD have actually drawn up to show what a potential building could look like there. That is not what the museum is proposing. So I'm sorry if that was if I wasn't clear about that.
It was, what are they?
They are proposing a park, essentially, a landscaped area that's more park-like.
Okay.
On our, I'm sorry, just to clarify, on the gravel parcel that we have now under our lease, it would be more of like a park entrance. The actual facility and building that they would build would be across the street.
Okay.
And that's shown in an earlier diagram in your presentation.
Okay. Has any other real estate companies or anybody else expressed interest? I don't remember if you said that or not.
They have in the past. It's a difficult site with only 55 years remaining on our ground lease for any developer to take that risk with that short amount of time. So we haven't had any recent interest, but for the right project, something could happen there.
Okay. So I'll just leave it at that. It seems like it's moving really fast too, because they're trying to I feel a little bit of pressure. But I would just say if they're talking $1, and we have potential to even do short-term leases that provide more money for the district, as an elected official for the transportation agency, I have to put the priorities into what our agency's mission is. So that's my feedback. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Relative to the Welton property, if you would look at page 21, please, of the packet, there is the description in December 2016, board authorized staff to pursue option agreement. We entered into an option agreement, as I understand it, ultimately with the City and County of Denver in September 2017. Can you tell me, please, what is the term of that option agreement? When does that option expire?
It's a 2-year agreement, so it expires next month.
It expires this year,
Yes.
next month?
Yes.
All right. Fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Has the city requested that we renew or extend the option?
No, they have not. They have just basically, in the conversations that we've had with them, they said they'd like to talk with us about a new approach for that property, but have not requested an extension of the option.
All right, thank you, which sounds like an excellent thought to look at a new approach. And so I thank you for confirming that. And relative to the National Medal of Honor Museum, I think it's fair to say that no one on the board is comfortable with the notion of leasing for $1 a year. And I believe that all those parties who are involved in this process understand that if the project should go forward, it would require some other individual, agency, company, or others to come forward and provide a financial incentive to RTD to enter into an agreement with them so that they could, for their purposes, lease it for $1 a year, but that there could be funding from someone else that would equal a fair market value rental. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair Lubo. I have a couple of questions. I'm looking at packet page 24, where I see Civic Center Station and the proposed park, and I see a proposed museum. So unless I'm misunderstanding, our only involvement is in the proposed park. We are not involved in any way in the proposed museum, correct?
Yes, the park is an entrance to the museum.
Yes. Yeah, I get that. Yes, I put my finger on there. So somebody else is going to deal with the museum and whatever that costs and wherever they're leasing that. And so I think that you've already heard pretty clearly from us that we're not inclined to give them $123,000 a year. If they want to pick up the lease for $123,000 a year, that would be great, and we would love to have them here. And we don't really care about the picture of the tall building because that's an option if we don't do the park there, is what you're trying to tell us. Oh, light bulb. Okay, so, and it's great that RTD could be involved with the National Medal of Honor museum, and maybe they would put on there, this park is a participant of RTD in their community, and all of that stuff would be great. But I think we're not going to get any place unless we tell them that they'd have to pick up the lease. And if they're going to have a museum, based on most of the other museums that I see here in Denver, like the place where they make the money and all, there's charges to get into those museums. And so maybe they could afford to pick up the lease. Okay, that's all I had. Thanks. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I may have missed it, but what did you say it cost us to maintain that parcel on an annual basis? So, I mean, we'd have costs that we wouldn't have to incur if you were leasing it to somebody else.
I don't have a number for the cost of maintenance of the parcel, but based on my conversations with our facilities group, it is a gravel parcel, so it doesn't take much maintenance at the moment, so the reduction in cost would be minimal.
Okay, thanks. And then the other question I had was, were there multiple cities involved in bids for this? Or how did Denver become one of the two selected sites? Do you have any knowledge of that?
It was a nationwide search, and they looked across the country and courted different cities, and different cities courted them, and they've ended up with Arlington, Texas, and Denver. And I think the Downtown Denver Partnership has been a strong proponent of bringing it to Denver.
Okay, so, I mean, I guess we could lease it to food trucks to park on there or something? I mean, what else, what other uses do you see other than it just sitting there as gravel as we turn down this museum?
That's a good question. That's something we've been looking at for the past couple of years. We've thought about food trucks, so we've thought about art, the city in its planning has expected that eventually there would be a building there, but that's not something that we've been able to make happen in the past few years.
So one thing I will say in terms of our evaluation, we did look at that site is if that building could be a consolidated RTD office building. So that was a potential that we looked at in terms of that. So that could be an RTD facility, but there would be a lot of things that would have to come into play for that to happen. But it's a, kind of a vision kind of thing is what could be there. And we said that, potentially it could be RTD. But again, we have not, had a discussion with the board about it, but that was just a potential that we talked about at one point.
Well, sometimes you're better off doing nothing because, 5-10 years down the road, that's valuable territory there in terms of state office buildings, courthouses, any number of things. And they're not going to make any more land in that area. So I don't know. I'd have to see more about this before I'd want to say yes or no.
Thank you. Director Lewis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to see alternatives if you all could provide that to the board for that parcel of land. More specifically about the Montbello timeline and the expected closing, it says 2019. And so I'm curious if 2019 is tomorrow or December 31st. I know that when they came and spoke to all of us as a board, they had been waiting quite some time to close this out and get this finished. And so I'm just curious if you can provide some updates.
I'll take this a bit and then see if there's more details. So when we advertised the property, we said as is, where is. So when we received their bid, then we were ready to close. But they have to go through some due diligence to get their financing in place. And so some of that due diligence was an environmental assessment. So they've done their phase 1 environmental assessment. Their phase 1 is indicating or recommending to do a phase 2 assessment. So they're getting ready to do a phase 2 assessment. We're going to have to probably issue them a right to go in and enter and do that phase 2 assessment. So essentially it's at their timing of bringing this project to fruition for them.
So you said we'd have to, not we, you and staff, would have to issue a phase 2 assessment?
Well, they would do, they have requested to do a phase 2 environmental assessment. So, but we would have them request some kind of license or entry permit because they're going to go in and do invasive work and they're going to need insurance requirements and things like that. It's very standard to do that kind of work. So we're in that process now, I understand. And then they'll do their phase 2 work, and then depending on what they see in their phase 2, then hopefully work forward and get their financing issues. This is all just part of typical kinds of financing things, and especially with their with the financing that they're going after. So we're not driving the timing of this at all. We're ready to go any day. We're just eager for them to get through their due diligence process.
So what's the actual action that needs to happen on their part to move forward in the phase 2?
Do you know where they are exactly,
We're preparing a right of entry license for their contractor. I just got their information yesterday, the scope of work that is required and the contractor that will be doing the work, a company out of Longmont, and we'll prepare the right of entry license and obtain the insurance from the contractor, and they'll be ready to go to do their work.
Yeah. How long does that process typically take? The steps that you've outlined?
Probably take a day or two on the property itself.
Okay.
And I believe that this company has been very responsive for them. They prepared the phase 1 in less than a week. So the phase 2, I would think, as soon as they get results, whatever they're evaluating, that it would be fairly quick.
If I could, the phase 2 work, the biggest time frame is to do the analysis on the sampling. So they're probably looking at a period of about 4 to 6 weeks to have a report from when they start the work.
Okay, thank you. This is more of a thank you to Bill Soroy. So I know we've had a few conversations about community land trust, and I saw that line here to continue to explore what that looks like, and community benefit as we're looking potentially to sell property. So just thank you for being receptive to that.
Thank you. Director Walker, please.
Thanks. Do we make any revenue? Do we have any revenue coming off of that parcel now?
No.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm fine with it being turned over to the Medal of Honor Museum. I remember years ago, I haven't looked at the Civic Center plan in forever, but I know that area that fits in with that form, that concept of having civic uses down in that area, museums and the courthouse and state buildings, government buildings, et cetera. So it fits in with that theme, and I think that would be something that the city of Denver would look favorably upon because it fits in with that Civic Center plan that was developed, I think, in 2004, 2005, something like that. Regarding 29th and Welton, I wouldn't be in favor of forcing a former property owner to have to spend any time dealing with the first right of refusal unless they negotiate that into the contract, into the purchase and sale agreement, that they get first dibs on it. I see that in easements all the time where it's just a limited property right, but not the full bundle of rights. So I wouldn't be in favor of that. I wouldn't want to spend staff's time trying to track down that chain of title, or somebody who doesn't own that property and might not even know that anybody in their family ever owned that property, having to deal with that even for a minute. So have there been other interested parties in that parcel on 29th and Welton while it was being worked on by CCD?
We haven't had any specific interest, inquiries while the city has been in discussions with the current developer. Certainly, there's been a lot of activity in that area. So if there was a known that property was available, I'm sure that we'd receive interest.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what I'm thinking. So those are my comments. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Cook, please.
Thank you. Director Walker talked about a civic center plan. Is there a plan that has been put in place by the city and county of Denver that we are sort of participants, or does that govern, or was this parcel ever considered a potential expansion site for the civic center hub? I just hate to trim our 20 or 30-year ability to expand if we needed to at some point without really thinking it through, is the question.
Yeah, so the Civic Center District Master Plan was completed probably 4 years ago, and it calls for activation on that site, temporary activation, whatever that means, a park, an active park. They have proposed all kinds of examples in the plan. And then eventually, the plan calls for a building of some sort there that would frame the Civic Center Park. But the remainder of our ground lease is 55 years, and that area was carved out of the station plan when we were redoing the station because it was not needed for the station and could have potential for another use.
So are we convinced that we wouldn't at some point, I mean, pretty reasonably convinced that it wouldn't be something that would be a benefit for our own use as an expanded site there? I just want to not foreclose it without really going through some thinking about that piece.
Yeah, I think that's something that was looked at a number of years ago during the station planning, and we should take another look at it and make sure that there isn't some immediate need for the Civic Center station.
Well, not even immediate, but foreclosing forever, our ability to expand on that site. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Director Fulska, are you on the line, and do you have any comments? Okay.
Hello, yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, all right. It takes a little time to turn off the mute. Yeah, I really think I agree with pretty much what everyone has said regarding the Civic Center piece. And it occurs to me that there are a lot of food trucks out there. For example, I know coming from a place like Grow House that could really activate that gravel area. I wouldn't be inclined to giving it away for $1. I think it would be interesting to see what the maintenance fees are, but as long as it was, at least a zero economic impact to us, I think that would be good. But I'm interested to see how it moves forward. And again, they're choosing between Arlington, Texas, and Denver. So I guess there's more to be seen. That's all. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you. Director Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair Luba. The picture on packet page, I'm going to let everybody play along, 27, that shows a potential building there. I'm just wondering if it has dawned on us that we are in a marvelous historical building here at the moment. And maybe the National Museum of Honor people would love to have a historic building. And then maybe we could build a building there and get out of our Civic Center lease and put all of our people in. Then we wouldn't be spending so much time riding our own 16th Street shuttle for people to go back and forth. And they could have a historic building here. So I wonder when you meet with their CEO on the 8th of August, if you could offer that as an option. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Okay. Quick.
Will you? I'll make it quick.
Yeah.
Will you all come back to us in the future this year with maybe some alternatives or some updates for these specific things that you've outlined?
Yes, that's the plan. I think, and even on the National Medal of Honor Museum, it would be next month.
Okay.
That the idea is to come back and have a more robust discussion about what we would be willing to offer or willing to accept for that parcel property with the National Medal of Honor Museum.
To move towards a recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we've beaten that horse to death, so let's go forward. The next update is the BRT feasibility study.
Good luck with the clicker.
I'm giving it to Bill.
We'll see if I have the magic touch. Director or Chair Lubau.
Yes.
As you can see, this is still Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning, and Brian Welch has rejoined me for the final update of the evening from staff, the Regional Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT, feasibility study. And I guess I'm going to give the clicker a shot. Brian.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Lubau and members of the board. I will limit my presentation to about 30 minutes, given the, no. No, I'm going to go for about maybe 5 minutes. But I don't want to minimize there's a tremendous amount of information in your packet. It's exhaustive. And in fact, what we did is we just put 6 or 7 slides up at the beginning to get you kind of up to date on where we are in our effort. This is, we've been working hard now for about 18 months with our stakeholders, and we've updated you previously. The stakeholder engagement has been ongoing. It's been very robust and actually very effective, including a bus tour that we did in June that involved people from throughout the corridors that we're looking at. I've included in your material 4 distinct examples of where we have made changes in the study and changed sort of some of the fundamental ways we're looking at it in response to some very insightful comments that we have received from people. And I'm not going to go through those. They're well articulated. If you have any questions, I'll leave that for later. I'd like to highlight this map. Now, you've seen a few versions of this map before, and probably the most significant thing to point out to you, and I apologize, it's a little bit hard for the audience to read the legend, but I'll just tell you, what we've done is we've defined what we believe to be a vision for bus rapid transit for our district. This will be further fleshed out, of course, during Reimagine RTD, so you'll have another opportunity to explore this with us. We're only differentiating at this point now between 2 different types, and they're related solely to financing. So we've identified those that have the highest potential for federal funding or state or local funding, and then we have the other category which we're looking at, which would be those that have the highest potential for state or local funding. Now, we are in what we call now, we're going to be back to the board, I'll tell you now, in October, with the results of what we're calling Tier 4. Now, these are the 8 routes that have received the most analysis, primarily because, as you recall, we started with the intent of identifying those routes where FTA small starts would be a likely funding source. Now, that requires a tremendous amount of analysis compared to other corridors. That doesn't mean the other corridors aren't important. It just means that we started literally with dozens and dozens of corridors, and if we would have attempted to do this kind of work for all the corridors, we would have been back in 4 years and spent 5 times as much money, and no one wanted to do that. So that's why we're doing this level of analysis for these particular routes, and we are not going to attempt for the 8 routes that we believe to be strong candidates for small starts to differentiate them. We believe they're all have different pluses and minuses, and we're, again, most of the work that has gone in to get us to here was very closely tied to the input we received from our stakeholders, because in some cases, they made choices between 2 different routes, and they said, well, we prefer Quebec instead of Monaco. We prefer this instead of that. So we listened to that, and that's how we're moving forward. And the last thing we have in here for you to look at is I just wanted you to be familiar with the level of sophistication that we have taken some of these corridors. We believe that for the 8 that are candidates for small starts, we're one step really before what would be a formal process to get them into project development. Now, what would have to happen next, of course, is extensive work with our stakeholders. That would be preliminary, but we have done enough work that we're at the point now where we're confident that they could move to that level. And depending upon the interest and timing of our stakeholder partners, we would know and come back to the board with a notion of how these might move forward. And I believe, Bill, that's...
I wish I could have.
There's a couple more that I just wanted to highlight as soon as they show up.
I wish we could
Okay,
take a
this is
picture of
important.
Bill.
Travel time savings. If you recall from Jarrett Walker's presentations, it's critical that we demonstrate significant travel time savings so that we can attract riders. The corridors that we're looking at all are anticipated to be congested in the future. And if we can provide a service, now these are travel time savings on the same routes that we currently provide service. In other words, on Alameda, we could save 22% in travel time. That's what the comparison is being done. And that's the key, obviously, to ridership. One of the things that we also wanted to highlight for you is you're all very aware of the district's commitment to provide transit services, particularly to those that we would regard as vulnerable populations. I've just shown one particular exhibit here to give you a sense of where this is a poverty measure. And if you'll notice, there's a good congruence between the 8 routes that are these candidates for small starts and poverty. And we were very pleased to see that because we certainly wouldn't want them to be disassociated from one another. One of our objectives of the many criteria that we're looking at Bus Rapid Transit is its ability to meet these needs. Just to recap, the next slide that's coming up is the schedule. We will be back on October 8th to present to you the complete report, which will be exhaustive and in-depth. We have some interim presentations, as you can see, with Dr. Cog that provided the majority of the funding for this. And with that, I will conclude and ask if the board has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. How does this compare travel time savings-wise with the Colfax project being worked on by Denver?
The travel time savings associated with Denver's project are in that double-digit range as well. If the center running BRT was deployed compared to the 15 and the 15L service that's currently there, you'd be seeing similar ranges of travel time savings before and after.
And would they be in competition with the ones that we're working on?
No. One of the things that we've carried forward from the very beginning is that we regard State Highway 119 and Colfax center running BRT as being, actually they're way out in front of this effort. So they have kind of a status of all their own. The board has made a financial commitment to State Highway 119. Denver has made a financial commitment to center running BRT and Colfax. They're both already in the fiscally constrained regional transportation plan. So we didn't attempt to try and reassess them since they're ahead of this process.
Thank you. Director Minton, please.
Yeah, on the diagram that has the little buses with time savings.
Right.
I-25, either the bus has a problem or that there are no, it hasn't left the gate.
We'll take that on highway.
Yeah, now that's a case where we already have conditions that allow us to not be, there wouldn't be any travel time savings essentially because the lanes are already there that give us exclusivity.
Okay, so we don't have a real advantage on that whole length there because we've already got the HOV that we're using.
Yeah, in the horizon year, those managed lanes are going to be for that whole corridor that we've identified in the future. So we'd have the same advantage that we do now for the Flatiron Flyer.
All right, and then on the, where did I go? I'm trying to find the pages where we have the individual 8 routes. Okay, I had to go up, not down. And I see, as an example, Federal Boulevard, it's showing me that up north, we're going to repurpose one of the side pull-offs, and further down into the CBD area, Central Business District, then we're going to repurpose through lanes. My question is, where would I find a document that would tell me the land acquisitions required for any one of these? Let's say 7, because I-25 is not going to be one of them. So where would I find something like that?
One of our criteria was no right-of-way acquisition.
Okay.
We believe that right-of-way acquisition would render these projects too expensive, frankly. And so the winnowing process involved looking at those cases where we could achieve some sort of exclusivity, either in the AM or the PM peak hour for all or a portion of the route without any right-of-way acquisition.
Okay, and then in that case, then when you have Federal Boulevard and you're taking some lanes for BRT, you are also taking, there's single vehicles and trucks and commercial vehicles, then they're also being affected, correct?
Correct.
So where would somebody see that to weigh?
The notion of each of these corridors is we evaluated the extent to which and the difficulty there would be associated with the very issues that you brought up. And so in some cases, the entire route could not have exclusivity, and we had to have, on these routes, there is a combination of mixed traffic as well as exclusivity, which is not uncharacteristic of bus rapid transit in the United States. So that some routes, frankly, did not make it from the 28 down to the 8 for that very reason, Director Menton. It was just too complicated, and we just didn't see that there would be a smooth path forward where the traffic would go, what you would do with parking. Many of those kinds of issues are the complications on projects of this nature.
This will get down into the weeds, but we've had issues with, since Flatiron Flyer started, that you're calling it BRT, but it's not really. Is this going to be the same? This is down in the weeds, but we don't have it's not at level.
Where we believe we are with the 8 routes is that they are going to meet the FTA definition either of corridor-based bus rapid transit or fixed guideway, one of the two. Corridor-based, FTA is going to look for the most portions of the route possible to have exclusivity for buses in the peak hours, in the peak periods. And we believe these 8 routes would be able to meet that criteria for the FTA definition. So these are, in fact, going to meet the federal government's definition of what they call bus rapid transit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Whitmore, please.
Well, with all due respect, you talk about complications, but when I look at the map on page 11, it doesn't look too darn complicated north of wherever, pick a point. It's blank. So for those of us that have to go back to Nada and Thornton and Brighton and Commerce City and Westminster and Broomfield and the list goes on, what do we got?
Well,
Are these projects of ours 10th, 12th, 15th? Is there any hope? Is there anything on the future that we can speak about that's, I'm sorry, not negative?
Certainly.
Again.
Oh, yeah. And the tenor of the report, as you'll see, where we've headed is again, we're only differentiating on this BRT vision really between those that have federal likelihood and those that don't. We are not implying, as you can tell from how we've moved forward, there's no phasing in this report. There is no prioritization even between the federal corridors and the non-federal corridors. I fully anticipate that it could be likely that a corridor that's not one of the federal corridors could move forward, because one of the things I mentioned to the board before, this is a different paradigm, bus rapid transit, where the local agencies are in the driver's seat. Well, we're in the driver's seat, but you know what I mean. They're going to dictate the pace at which these projects move forward. And if a project that is not a candidate for federal funding has local support, there's the willingness to meet the board's vision for bus rapid transit, and it meets a lot of the other criteria that you deem important, why couldn't it go forward first? And I think if you look at the network, it's very generous in terms of a vision from that nature. It's extensive throughout our district. And while a lot of people would say, well, some of those, are those really bus rapid transit? We're being more flexible, frankly, to address this very issue.
And I would like to reinforce that on that regional BRT network, the slide entitled Proposed District-Wide BRT Network Development.
What page are you?
Yeah, I wish I knew.
It's packet page 37.
Package page.
Packet page 37.
Thank you.
37, thank you. 74 on mine, that's why I paused. You'll note a reference to the concepts and applications that Brian just identified in terms of corridors and communities that demonstrate support will have the opportunity. Importantly, in the legend, you'll see that both the lighter blue network and the white network combined comprise the most promising corridors for bus rapid transit, or that full network. So look at that legend and look at that network. That comprises the white and the blue, what we've identified as the most promising corridors. The distinction being, as Brian noted, eligibility for federal funding in current status or not, but that full network of the lighter blue and white represent the most promising corridors from our analysis.
Thank you for the clarifications. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Director Lewis, please.
Thank you. So I've heard eligibility for federal funding, likelihood of receiving federal funding, and I'm trying to reconcile that with what Jeff Walker talked to us about with the ridership versus coverage, and I was hoping that you could maybe walk me through that.
Yeah,
Please.
that issue is going to be right before you during Reimagine RTD. We believe that bus rapid transit is a key part of the district's future, absolutely. But where we think it's going to be most effective in the larger picture is at the core of what we're going to look at as part of Reimagine RTD. We want to flow from this effort directly in so you can make some choices about the mobility plan for the future. Which parts of it should be bus rapid transit? Which parts of it should be technologies maybe that are going to come up during the effort itself? What are we going to hear from our stakeholders? What about the types of vehicles to provide what you're addressing, this notion of coverage and ridership? Traditionally, bus rapid transit is regarded as fast, frequent service, so much so that you don't need a schedule. That's kind of the elevator definition of bus rapid transit. However, we can, during Reimagine RTD, come up with our own terminology and our own way of looking at it to see what makes the most sense for us here in our district. What we'll be examining during the effort is, do we want to have a series of individual bus rapid transit corridors, all with their own name, all with their own branding? Flatiron Flyer here, Center Running Colfax, State Highway 119. Or would the board like to go in the direction of, say, Minneapolis, St. Paul, where Metro has a branded system that people throughout the district know that the service is going to be of a certain type wherever they are, as far north, south, east, and west as you go? That'll come up during Reimagine RTD, and we want to hear back from the board how that fits in with your vision too, so that anytime you got on one of these systems, you'd know it would be fast, frequent, reliable, don't even need a schedule, off-vehicle fare payment, and all. Did I answer the question?
It's actually, yes, very much so. And you made me think of another question, it sounds like you were looking for direction from the board to help you investigate and answer that question, which I didn't realize that.
Yes, when we come back on October 8th, what we're going to focus on with the board is, based upon the totality of information that you've received, where you would like to take this in terms of your position on the future of bus rapid transit. We don't know how exactly you want to do this, but this could form the basis for how it's handled during Reimagine RTD. Whether or not you want to look at these in different categories or ways, that's completely up to you. We could think about it in Reimagine RTD in a new set of service standards that we think might be applicable in a case like this. And that's where we're going to kind of take you to the next threshold for your input. And then that would be the basis. Even we're going to share with you more what we've heard from some of our stakeholders about where they want to go next. Okay. And let you know, because we've already heard from some of them about, hey, we're starting to study these things. We're going to do, there's a multi-jurisdictional study many of you have probably heard about on Federal Boulevard that involves Adams County and Westminster and the city and county of Denver. And it's going to be very comprehensive. So they're going to take what we've done and take it to the next level, which is what we were hoping would happen from a comprehensive effort. And as you know, there's up in the northern part of the district, there's quite a bit of activity going on with regard to bus rapid transit as well, dating all the way back to the Northwest Area Mobility Study.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think I may have misspoke. I said Jeff Walker. Unless you've written a book, I'm more than happy to read it. I meant your, I will take it.
Okay, Director Geisinger, please.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I would say thank you. I think this is a very good example. The changes that you highlight in the first few pages are a great example of listening to the stakeholders. And you guys, and I know Dave Genova was up with the Northwest area elected officials, and I'm sure all of your team, but just to be a little clear, the NAMS corridors aren't as good a fit apparently for the small starts and new starts, and they were originally listed as phase 3, which does sound like they'll never get built, right? Or at least not for a long time. And I think that this is a much better way of presenting it, which is the corridors in white that are more likely to get some of that federal money, and the corridors in blue that are still moving forward, but with state and local funding. So good job. I think that's great. That same map, the black corridor, I just have a couple quick questions. The candidate corridors, I think they're called, those not quite as high on either list, but still kind of out there. Is that the potential?
That's correct.
Okay. And then on question on page 80 in the packet, I think it is. I love this I like these little graphs where I can just look at it real quickly and say, wow, Alameda looks good. So the bigger blobs there, the bigger circles, mean that each of those make it more likely. For instance, the big circle on Alameda for capital cost per mile, it's a lower capital cost per mile.
That's correct.
So you can look at this and say, wow, Alameda looks good, Broadway looks good, Colorado. And will you be prioritizing that at the end?
No, we're not going to. If the board wishes to understand more from the stakeholder perspective and go down that path, that is totally within your purview. But we concluded as a team technically that we didn't have enough rationale to differentiate between these 8. So we're just going to leave it kind of at this level.
Okay.
It would be difficult to come up with a quantifiable method to do that. Okay. That was just one of the big conclusions of the study. You know, we originally thought we were going to get to 3 to 5, but we have 8. So.
And with the NAMS corridors and the other corridors that are more likely to get state and local funding, it doesn't sound like it's part of this, but will we be doing some of this? Is great analysis: daily boardings, daily vehicle miles traveled, capital cost per mile. Is there a plan for doing some of that?
Well, a lot of that is already underway. Some of it's been done. And yes, for some of those other corridors, member jurisdictions have already started to pursue that, and we'd be delighted to cooperate with them, you know, to advance that level. In the city and county of Denver, I know that they're going to launch multiple corridor studies to follow up on some of these routes to take them to the next level. And I fully anticipate that other jurisdictions, I've heard from Arapahoe County on Arapahoe Road, for example, that they're very interested in moving forward. So it's really wide open, and we'll participate and encourage that level. again, for this, we could only take so many to this exhaustive level of analysis, but we're going to support anybody in the district with all of our resources available to pursue bus rapid transit. For example, we're going to do all the modeling for the federal effort, that multi-agency effort. We think that's a good way to help out.
That's great. I agree. Thanks.
Director Busick, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question for clarification on the average travel time savings graph. I believe it was Director Menton that talked about the I-25 bus not getting off the mark, but I think I understood your answer to mean that that corridor doesn't have any savings because you've got managed lanes that the buses use, and that's good. But what about that segment of I-25 from 120th North to Highway 7, where there is no BRT service, no express bus service, and there are no managed lanes yet? Is that included in this analysis?
It is, because it's the horizon year. So
okay,
that in this case, we're assuming they would be in place for the route that we've described.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Director Folska, are you on the line, and would you like to comment?
Thank you. No, I have no comment.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I would like to ask some questions. Thank you for this work. It's very exhaustive, as well as exhausting. What's interesting to me is it looks like there's really no prioritization. It's more informational. And so I like to think of it as the two buckets that Dave talked about at our stakeholder meeting. And so this is one of the buckets that talks about that would go towards FTA, that have the possibility of getting FTA funding. For the bucket that would not have that, do we have a draft matrix of different results for them too?
We don't, and we believe that really there you're getting into more of the more subtle ways that one of those projects could become a priority, and it's going to be really at the behest of the member jurisdictions, that what they bring before the board as the next project that they wish to move forward with, and then we would evaluate it from there. We didn't think there was a rationale to prioritize, or as I said, for the 8 or for the rest of the network either. We think we're into a pure policy question at that point. There just isn't enough technical rationale at this stage to differentiate those that are local and state funded. It's more of a question of the key things to move these things forward are the jurisdictions willing to support bus rapid transit.
So I'm wondering, because I haven't seen the study, what you have said about this second bucket. You're not prioritizing, so what are you saying?
Well, what we have in the documentation is there is quite a bit of data for the 28 routes that we did travel modeling for, and we presented that to the board in a previous, and there were quite a number of metrics, but even at that level, we didn't attempt to say, purely on the basis of this criteria, we think this is first, and this is second or third. But there is more, Director Lubau, analytical work for a larger number of routes in the report that's available to the board to kind of review, to get a feel, but we don't really have and did not want to try and box in the board on, well, this is how we think you should rank them, because it's just not in the nature of this type of effort to do that.
So basically, it's not the final result is not saying these look like they're great candidates. It's more these are routes that are potential BRT, and here's why, and that's it. You kind of leave it at that.
Great routes on paper are not always great routes when it comes to implementation, particularly for a multi-jurisdictional, complicated project that's relying on local jurisdictions.
I see. Okay. Okay, and I just had a question about State Highway 7, because you had mentioned that a route would be kicked out if you needed to purchase rights of way. And I know that State Highway 7 is complicated, and I would imagine there needs to be some purchasing of rights of way. And so I was wondering, where does that leave that in terms of this study?
Well, for this study, it's not pertinent. There's separate studies that are underway or have been completed for State Route 7 that are more exhaustive than the level of effort we did here. And so I couldn't answer your question directly about right-of-way issues on that particular facility. What we did is we narrowed it down to the 8 that we looked really, really closely at right-of-way.
Okay, and that was in bucket 1, though?
That's in the federal bucket.
Right, okay.
Because
All right.
we believe that for it to be cost-effective from the federal government's point of view, as soon as you get into right-of-way, relative to the other 28 or the other 50, it's just too problematic.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your work. I think we're done with our questions. And it looks like we're done with our updates. Okay, so next up is other matters. Are there other matters? Director Walker, please.
Thanks. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Jacksonville and Minneapolis, first for the Transit Board Members Conference, and then I went to Minneapolis for the Leadership APTA. I'm on the Leadership APTA Committee, and we got to tour some of their facilities also. One thing I learned, everybody has a driver shortage. There's no getting around that. That's just a national phenomenon, and we're doing all we can, and they're doing all they can to pull in drivers, but that's the downside of a good economy. It's an employees market. A lot are also experiencing rider shortfalls, and as Mr. Walker, no relation, said last week that the price of cars has come down. The price of gas is somewhere around $2.20 now, so it's easy to drive. And even though it's not really convenient by most, in a lot of instances, the feeling of that, I know where that car is, even if I know I'm going to be stuck in traffic for 10 minutes, at least I know I'll be in my car. So that's a lot of what's driving that. JTA, Jacksonville, is doing some pretty good things with their BRT and their monorail. It's going to be a BRT slash monorail system. It'll be a rubber-tired monorail that'll come down off of the rails and mix with traffic. They're also building a new headquarters right above their monorail system, which is really interesting. You went on that tour, right? Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. They're going to have all kinds of services in that. Also, and they have some development opportunities on the land across the street from them. Let's see. One interesting thing that they did was they tried to serve an area right near Jacksonville Beach. Didn't work, so they took their buses away, their 40-footers away, and they're supporting bike transit. Those bike rickshaws, I can't remember what they're called, but those bike chariots. Yeah. Pedicabs, thank you, pedicabs. So they're supporting that, kind of like what we do with our, with Inglewood's, it's not the trolley anymore, yeah, the Inglewood trolley now. We also took a ride on, when I was in Minneapolis, I took a ride on their BRT line, I think that's called their C line, and they experienced, once they spaced out the stops, and they made some improvements to the specific stops, they got a lot of ridership. I think the ridership just about doubled in that corridor along Plymouth Avenue North in Minneapolis. So they've had a lot of success in that. It's more frequent service. Folks don't need to schedule anymore. It comes about every 10, 15 minutes. And it replaced a line that used to come every 45 minutes or 35. Sometimes it would come 35, 40 minutes. So anyway, those are just some of the things that I observed. If you have any other questions, let me know and I'll do my best to answer them. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see anyone else for other matters. Our next meeting date is October 8th, and this meeting is adjourned.